Hello, everyone. My usual first question is, can you hear us? Can you see us? You're supposed to see three people and hear one of them talking. So if someone can type in the. I never trust this technology thing, right? The whole internet. And can you hear us? Okay. Thanks, Nikita. Thanks, Ollie. Okay, so very, very happy to welcome everyone back to another session of Stark at Home. We have today two very special guests. We have no other than the creator of Magic the Gathering, Dr. Richard Garfield, and creator of organized play on Magic the Gathering, Skaff Elias. And without further ado, I'll just ask them to very briefly present themselves. Just one comment. If you have questions, please use the Ask a Question button and not the chat because it's very hard to track the chat. And I'm sure some people are going to ask, is there a token or an NFT or anything? So the answer is no. You come to this show to be wiser and to enjoy, but there's no token or NFT remuneration for it. Sorry, guys. Okay, so Richard, can you please say a few words about yourself?
I was in academics teaching math when a game that I designed, Magic the Gathering, got published, and I left academics and went into game design full time. Magic was the first trading card game. I made several other trading card games after that, and many other games. Been designing games ever since. Left Wizards, I don't know, 2000, something like that. And since then, I've been working as a designer and consultant on games. I'm mostly motivated by what games and game design that interests me. And co-wrote a book. One of my other co-authors is Skaff, and the other is not here, on the characteristics of games, which is sort of intended to be a textbook getting started in how to talk about and think about games. And here I am.
Skaff, what about you?
My career in games, I got lucky in grad school. I was, I guess, a couple offices down from Richard, and he would draft people to play his games. And so from that time, I've been working with Richard at first on Magic, and then designing Magic expansions, and then probably mostly what I'm known for is the organized play system, the Pro Tour, the leagues, and everything like that for Magic, but also our other games. Designed a couple other games there at Wizards, and then eventually took off, and now we've do Three Donkeys, which is game design and consulting.
Okay, so
20 years ago.
Yeah, sorry for I'm not very good with like playing with the toggle video or whatnot. So maybe I'll just okay. Bear with me. So the plan for today is basically to ask Skaff and Richard questions under two like separate topics. First is like basically just the history of Magic the Gathering gaming, and of course because I'm very interested in blockchains and scalable blockchains, then of course games and blockchains, which is a topic that interests a lot of the listeners here. And then the second part, which also should interest those who are thinking about creating games or whatnot over blockchains, is like what's in a good game, like how to design a good game, because I'm guessing many people like myself, have been consumer of games but never actually thought about what it means to try and design one. So let's just start with a very simple, the most obvious question is, probably to Richard. Can you tell us just the story of how did Magic the Gathering, how did it get born and the story of that?
Yeah. So Magic, my first designed game or game that I considered publishable was a board game called Robo Rally, which was published a year or two after Magic. And I was not expecting to be a professional game designer, it did not seem like a good place to stake your future. And so I chose academics in part because I thought that I could take my hobby of game design seriously within the bounds of a mathematical career. But Roborally had a, a super fan, which was my friend Mike Davis, and he took it upon himself to pitch it to a lot of different companies, and eventually found Wizards of the Coast, which I think was his 7th or 8th company. And Wizards had not published any games yet, but they were setting out to publish role-playing games, actually role-playing supplements. And they said that Peter Adkison, the president of that company, said he liked Roborally, but wanted something cheaper, and ideally something faster and portable that could be played at conventions. And it was a few days after that I had this epiphany that games that players didn't all have to have the same equipment, and I told him about this concept, and he was super excited. But I remember back then I didn't actually even know that it was possible to make a good game along those lines, and that's because I usually model my games based on other games, and I had sort of played lots and lots of different games over the years, and playing poker where you could choose your own deck, or chess where you could choose your own pieces. These didn't immediately jump out as being better games than the originals. But a few weeks later, maybe a month, maybe 2, I had this prototype, which was built on the back of a card game that I'd been tinkering with for about 5 or 10 years, and it was really fun with a single deck where I shuffled it and divided it between 2 players. After that, I made the first sort of trading version of it, where players got unique decks, and in fact, I recruited Skaff to be my art director for it, and we put together lots and lots of cards and shuffled them in a big hefty bag, and divided them up among the players, and and that was really the first trading card game that was being tested there, and we shared it with Wizards, and a couple years later it was published, and was immediately and successful, and always surpassing my expectations for years and years.
So, by the way, I think I'll just stick around because like popping down and up, I don't know.
Yeah, better.
Okay, so that's why I returned. By the way, please type your ask a question using that button, and maybe I'll try to dabble with the advanced technology of inviting, people who are asking questions to ask them. So far, I always just read them aloud, but Skaff and Richard said that might be more fun to have people speak. So, like, if you type a question, be prepared. Maybe we'll invite you. Okay. So the second question I want to ask you is can you tell us a little bit about like the kind of struggles you had in the early day of Magic: The Gathering? For many of us, probably we already know of it as like this amazing success, and it always seems in hindsight that like whatever did the first deck of card, pitched it, and immediately boom, it went ballistic. But I wonder if it was really that way.
The game's success was astounding. It was just always surprising, and that carried the roots of our early challenges. We kind of viewed Magic as being having both a game component and a trading card or collectible component, but very early on we realized that these 2 things did not mix well. it looked like it did, and there were a lot of people at the company who were very excited about it. But the fact that cards were disappearing from the shelves as soon as they were put down and then being reintroduced to the market, priced up 10 times, this is not healthy for gameplay. And we were absolutely, definitely heading for a fad boom and bust, which you always see with these collectibles. It's sort of inevitable when you get a speculative feedback loop. And
We're not familiar with that in blockchain.
um, and it the people in R&D and me, we were committed to the game as a game, and we knew that it had legs as a game in the sense that the play testers had been playing and were still playing for the most part 2 years after release with the same cards, the pool of cards. So it doesn't have to be a collectible boom and bust. It could be a long-term game, like Scrabble or D&D or something like that, where people play generation after generation. And that's what we aimed to make it. But that cannot coexist with people pricing it way out of the reach of people who want to play it. So that was I would say our biggest challenge at the beginning. That and its related challenge, which is just simply printing enough product for the players.
Yeah, we early on, I was in charge of the business side of stuff, somewhat against my will, and yeah, that was our biggest challenge. I mean, Richard would actually, like, I remember him being actually upset, like, I don't want to say crying, but like emotional about how, kids would go to the store and they couldn't afford to play the game. So so we made probably the single least popular decision in the history of Magic, where we sort of printed to order and we just blew out the cards. We were no longer allocating. The previous expansions had been allocated, and so the market crashed, which is kind of the only way to drive out speculators. And so, yeah, I mean, so that was probably in '94, about a year after release. In the beginning, the idea was to print enough cards, but the problem was the growth cycle. We were just growing so quickly that that even though we thought we were printing enough, we weren't. And then a couple times we purposely maybe didn't print enough. And then the other issue is, even if you're printing enough, and this was another big challenge Richard didn't mention, although he's its biggest champion, is even once we were printing enough, the problem was all the cards were designed to be played with each other, and that was part of the appeal of the game. But then that in itself increased the price over time, because there were more and more older cards that people didn't have access to. So we had to convince everyone to play the product using only the last couple years worth of cards. So we had sort of a target price for people to play the game. Did some research, put it in and amongst other hobbies, other sports. Richard was big on thinking of Magic as an intellectual sport, and then that's when we started the organized play, to incentivize people strongly to play in the way we thought was the most sustainable. So, and that's where the Pro Tour started, and the various formats of draft, viewing Magic almost as a disposable, and so we launched that whole campaign. And then, like Richard said, there was also this other challenge, which was just opening up new distribution, and just printing enough cards was actually became a really big problem once we got everything going.
So I didn't think about this earlier, but would you say that you drove value from the NFTs or the cards towards the experience and the time? Like the scarcity now became maybe the time or the tournaments or something like that, rather than the.
Yeah, it was. So the way we thought of it is if as long as the population of players was still growing, and then people would eventually stop playing the game. A lot of these older cards and the older collections would disappear. But even more importantly than that, as long as you're still growing, there's not enough old cards for people to play. So we maintained old formats. We just didn't emphasize them. So people were still playing with some of the older cards. And in terms of scarcity, because it's random which cards you get in a pack, in some sense, for anyone that's not just buying everything immediately, cards are kind of locally in time anyway scarce for the vast majority of players. Very few of our players owned all the cards.
Yeah, it is worth emphasizing this because the idea that you have to retire cards. As Skaff said, that was something which was hard for people to swallow. But we've consulted for many companies and worked on many projects that are what I like to call massively modular games, which are massively expandable games. And it is a logical necessity that if you want to keep on coming out with components for playing, you have to get rid of old components as well. If you don't want to fall into this trap of making them more and more powerful, so you get power creep, which disenfranchises the old players. Something like that might work. But if you want to keep an even keel, you have to get rid of the old stuff. It doesn't mean that the old stuff can't be played with, but it's got to. But there has to be environments in which people just look at a subset. It doesn't have to be the new stuff, but some controlled subset. And the reason for that is if you think about how these games work, the more and more components you have, if you're trying to keep them within some bounds of balance, the less important and impactful each one is. And so I remember this was completely predicted by us, but it was really driven home when Ice Age was released. And with Ice Age, I remember one of the early players who played it. I mean, this was a game that had been worked on almost as long as the basic Magic, because I don't know, they started working on it a year, less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year.
After the base games got made. So it was being worked on that long, and the person who was doing the critical review of it said there are 2 cards worth playing and one that's interesting. And you've got here 300 cards and countless hours put into this, and that's what our players are getting out of it: 2 cards and something that's kind of interesting. No, we had the way I put it was, we don't want to be in the business of making and selling cards. We want to be in the business of making and selling play environments, because you can do that forever and you can make that sort of endlessly interesting. But if you keep on just shoveling cards into the same environment, it's gonna stagnate.
There's a lesson there, I guess, for blockchains, right? By the way, there are some amazing questions, but I want to first of all cover a little bit about gaming, and then take some questions. So I want to ask you, I'm guessing that at some point, Magic the Gathering as a game sort of climax, meaning it probably did some exponential thing and then sort of, I don't know, peaked or stayed there, maybe it's still there. And then it's a more of a personal question in terms of career and whatnot. What does one do when it plateaus, or God forbid loses the spotlight to other things? How do you what do you do after a climax in your career, or how do you
Well, as a personal question,
Richard, I'm going to jump in. Richard goes and designs different games and then saddles other people with maintaining his old brilliant games as he goes off into fun stuff.
It was Magic itself maintained such a growth of popularity for so long that it really wasn't an issue for me until so many years later. It was something that I would think about. But from the get-go, you look at how successful something was like Magic. One, if they have an ounce of sense, has to realize that it's very unlikely they're going to do anything as influential as that again, because people do influential things, but they don't have like this track record of making such a different thing and having it be successful every time. So basically, I overcame that immediately and was able to throw myself into my first love, which is what got me into it in the first place, which was game design, and explore trading card game design, explore board game design, explore just all the amazing areas of game design. And I've just been um, loving this renaissance because it's not just about my games. That's not what that does get me going, but it's just as much exploring other people's design. And this renaissance in games, both digital and paper, has just been endlessly interesting for me and engaging.
So, how has gaming changed with the adoption of the internet? So, I understand that Magic pretty much grew with the very early days of the internet, but the internet itself has changed. So,
Yeah, a real quick bit of history. I'm pretty sure Mike met Peter first on the internet, right, Richard?
Yes, that's true.
And I don't know how many people here are old enough to remember like the old Usenet groups, but that was the internet. It was pre-web initially, and so when Magic first started, we had more. It was a long struggle to break us out into our own Usenet group, and eventually became multiple ones. But we had more posts per day than anyone except like the weather servers, and we had more total information flow than anyone except the pornography sending pictures. So like we were very, very, very big, especially with all the card auctions and stuff like that, and discussing strategy and decks. So from the very early, even pre-web days, we had a big presence on the internet, which was required because that so much information was needed to be transmitted back and forth between the players for a million different reasons, hooking up with each other to play, strategy, and of course card trading.
Yeah,
anyway, jump in with I just thought that little piece of history would be interesting for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great way to set it up. But yeah, the internet was really important for Magic. Games like Magic really are really are built upon community, and so having a huge number of independent card shops and communities around that is just an order of magnitude less powerful than starting to link that community digitally and grow into that. So yeah, there's for building community, it was super important. Especially since there were these production problems at the beginning. So it wasn't like people could just get all the cards they want and play against, get their friends in easily because the cards were not available and then they were marked up so expensively. So yeah, I think the internet was valuable for building and maintaining that community in those days, especially.
And how has it changed over the years? Is it like less fun, less about play, more about like special effects, like more adrenaline, more violence, more, I don't know, sex, more like what has changed since has the innocence been lost? Like
I don't think there's more violence and sex because that was always around in even in the early, even pre-Magic days. But a couple of interesting things about the move to the internet. Two things. One is it's much harder to have a good community because of the anonymity on the internet. So you'll see Richard hates games where you don't have full chat. And of course, 90% of the time you don't have full chat in these games. And it's because people are awful. Like there's just, just terrible when there's anonymity. It's like the heart of darkness out there. And so so that's a challenge. The other thing though too is the physical stuff. It was I will say that there's an interesting thing that that was to our benefit, was because we were forced to work through retailers and distribution, where in any type of game you're going to have a community which is a level of people, say, between the publisher and the player, that are critical to actually getting your game rolling and setting up the social structure. And so on the internet today, like, I guess the equivalent would be probably like a game like Minecraft, right? Where people are paying and setting up their own servers so that a whole bunch of people could play. It's very similar to, say, how retail stores work. And we were very careful to always prop up the retail stores, because those are the people that are like, those are your evangelists. Those are the people that are setting up your communities, managing things at a personal level. And of course, they make money from it, but we wanted to make sure that they continued to make money from it. So some people would view the lack of being able to sell directly to the consumer as a negative, because obviously you're losing a bunch of margin there. And it certainly is. However, if you view it the right way and you are squeezing the value out of that distribution chain, which is very difficult to do given the competence level of a lot of the people in the old days, it more than makes up for it. And so, like, it's so easy for games today to not end up, say, being like Minecraft or whatever, where it's just, here's the game and everyone accesses it equally, and there's very little room for people to provide that sort of I don't know, middle level of service. That's a challenge on the internet today, which we, were sort of forced into going around.
So, internet, Web 1, Web 2, we get to Web 3, blockchain, which is, of course, how I reached out to you guys. I think it was like around 2 years ago, to try to, try to work together on something related to games and blockchains. And I know, at least initially, and I wonder, maybe you still have like pretty critical views and scathing views of like blockchains and games. So spill it out. Like games and blockchain. Can they be merged somehow or no?
Oh yeah, they absolutely can. I mean, the way I view blockchain is that you're the user owns the material, and within that framework, you can just make games. So you can obviously make good games. The What this brings is often overstated, because you have without blockchain, you need someone sponsoring your game. So you need servers or a host company or whatever. But that's kind of required for a community anyway. So being released from that, you're still going to want it. But so I would say that the most really the biggest thing it does is allows you to explore other revenue models, because you get caught in these situations like you have with a lot of, for instance, mobile games where the revenue models there are that you have to be free to play, and that's not intrinsically a bad thing, but you've also got to pay for these things. And so you have to figure out methods to get people to pay for free to play. And some people have done that quite well, but everybody is familiar with the problems that brings, where whatever, it's a pay to win, so you have to pay to get the big stuff, or it's a grind. You have to play forever doing boring stuff, or you can only play for 30 minutes at a time, and then you got to start paying. And there's various levels of predatory practice there, which is possible, not intrinsic, but it is possible, and you see it. So by having it so that the user owns the material, that allows you to explore other methods, which could be better. It works well for paper games that I buy Monopoly, and I have Monopoly, and I can play it with whoever I like. Uh, uh, the the danger is that if this is put collectible first, that's basically incompatible with games, um, uh, for the same reason that it was back in the day. And if you think about it, it's never going to work long term if this is principally a collectible. And anything, I would be skeptical of anything which says buy it now, it's going to be worth so much, or start playing now and make money, right? All those things are are making it about the revenue model rather than about the game. Um, so, yeah.
Very, yeah. I completely, I can completely relate to that and empathize. Yeah.
I will add one other thing is the fact of owning it. If there's some way, and there are ways, but if these ways are realized where you can actually take your own thing and go to different places, like you can with paper games, uh, that begins to open it up. So if you, um, so so if the publisher makes it and then there's a community of people developing and you developing stuff and you can go anywhere with your owned assets, that begins to add extra value to the blockchain assets. And some of those work really well with massively modular games because, for example, with Magic, as we've talked about, you can't just keep printing cards and throwing them out there. It makes a garbage environment. You have to control that environment. Um, but in the digital world, when they do that, they're controlling the environment, and it becomes very hard for players to control their own environment. That's not true for Magic, right? Wizards can control what they're paying money for in the tournaments, but they can't control what you do in your kitchen, right? You can play whatever you like with whatever cards you like with whatever rules you like. The more that can be a part of the blockchain experience, the more that component of it has some value.
Very interesting. So you're saying, I guess one thing that I'm taking from here that resonates very much with me is games cannot be collectibles or the value. It's about the experience and really enjoying the play. And I think a lot of blockchain projects or that call themselves gaming were trying to first solve the scarcity and collectible thing. And another thing you're saying, there's great potential that hasn't been, I think, I don't know of a project that managed to tap into it, which is the ability to be the true owner of the the assets in a way that it far transcends, at least in the digital world, what you can do on other on some of the popular platform where you're inside their closed environment. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to go to the next question or?
No, but I very much want to hear more.
I think people have, the blockchain has successfully created trading cards or comic books or, coin collections. It's been really good at capturing that product in the real world. And so far, there's probably some example somewhere, but so far it hasn't really been fundamentally used to make games. And I think it goes back to like what Richard's saying about this managed environment. The most interesting proposition of the blockchain, which is sort of this, distributed ownership stuff, is really, it's a little bit odd because it's so important for a long-term game, for a large game, for a successful game. It's so important to manage the play environment and the social structure. So you inherently would like to have some, governing body, or it doesn't even have to be governing. You can think of it as like an analogy we use sometimes is like a country club. Like we all agree to pay money to the country club, and therefore it's a better golf experience for us, right? And if we had to do it on our own, there's no real way to capture that kind of special social structure associated with it, or governing bodies for sports. And so inherently you end up in this kind of roughly client server situation, which means that then this utility that is in the blockchain isn't really like, it's not that interesting because you want the central authority anyway. But I think a good place where utility would be added is the sort of stuff I was saying, is that and Richard was talking about with the kitchen play, is that sometimes you actually want to be able to incentivize semi-independent parties, like we say did with retailers or tournament organizers or whatever. And there, I think there is some utility in the blockchain. It's just it needs to be in that end of the model, not necessarily with just the people playing the game, strictly by themselves. Like, in other words, you sort of need more than two, a multiple party kind of system for it to, I think, at least there's some potential there for it to actually provide utility.
Yeah. So what I take from here is you're saying there's this paradox that blockchain is supposed to be decentralized and anyone can do anything, but you're saying a lot of good experiences, including in games and in software in general, usually require someone who's like day job is very passionate about making it good and maintaining it, and then this sort of tends towards decentralization. Towards centralization, right? You want someone who's really backing, let's say, this game and updating it and maintaining it. And then even if it would be on a blockchain, then maybe it's going to end up centralized. But at the very least, like blockchains offer like more of a spectrum of centralization to decentralization. And one could conceivably have a world where various, republics or associations of people who were passionate about something. Maybe there's one central party that does a little bit more, or two or three of them, but it just gives you a broader spectrum of ownership and who controls it. That I agree it hasn't been fulfilled yet, and maybe never will. Like maybe it's always gonna be some publisher that does everything, but there's at least potential there.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked before about like mods, the opportunity to possibly monetize mods for games in general. A lot of games, it's less true now than it was, I don't know, probably around 2000 or so. People, or a little earlier actually. It was very common to provide really good modding tools for people, and a lot of these mods people did just for fun, and this publisher wanted that because then more people would be playing the game in different ways. But then it was difficult for them to monetize it, and now, of course, it's difficult for people to know where they should be developing, playing their mods, etc. So there's probably some possibility there for the blockchain, and also I still think there's possibilities for the equivalent of, like I said, for people actually setting up. And again, this is not quite what Richard was saying with the kitchen environment, but something close to it, where people are setting up their own, subsections of the game for people to play, whether those are mods or not.
Okay. Maybe time to take a few questions. And I'll just curate because we have like 20 questions. Some of them are also about game design, which is our next section. So let's see now. So there's one question. Just I'll just deal with a few that. So how to participate in this campaign? I don't know what this is about. So I'm just going to delete it. I don't know what you mean to participate in this campaign. Anyway. Okay. Does Magic the Gathering have intentions to publish future expansions as NFT collections? If so, will these have in-game utilities, and how are you planning to deploy them to the blockchain? StarkNet, StarkX, thank you. So, and I'll invite some people to come on, but I think
that one we can skip pretty quickly, just in that Richard and I haven't worked for Wizards of the Coast for almost 20 years. So we have really nothing to do with Magic the Gathering. Sorry for the 30th edition stuff. We didn't have anything to do with that. and so we can't really answer the magic question.
Okay, so now I'm going to try and invite. Wait. Oh, there's a. I'm going to invite someone on screen to ask the question. Let's see if it works. So I invited someone called Undefined.
Fingers crossed.
Let's see if it works.
Someone called user
What?
unknown.
Maybe, I don't know if it said. Okay, let's try inviting someone else. So Jean Paul.
Oh, someone says no, can't join. Watching it work, can't join.
Okay. So I'm going to invite Jean Paul to ask a question. Sorry, and then let's see if Jean Paul can. Yeah, it's the first time I'm trying this technology. Okay, and so meanwhile, let's ask the question by Undefined. I think that's Zach Armstrong. So Richard, you've explored themes around randomness and balance with Keyforge, SoulForge, and perhaps Mindbug. What kinds of things does the new generation of digital tools offer you and Skaff in exploring and elevating new designs like these?
Well, it's hard to say until they've been designed, but there's a lot of game design power available in the internet and in computers, and it's been a lot of fun taking advantage of those new powers by making cards that can do things that they can't do in paper. It was particularly exciting to be able to take this idea of unique decks to each player, which we were talking about back in the 90s, and actually realize it with publishers. That was about with printers, and that was about printing technology catching up to the design. But yeah, I guess there's a lot of potential there, but I can't really pin down anything until I've designed it or worked on it more or seen it with other people.
Okay, another one. I tried to invite Jean Paul, but I
think I'm here.
Oh, you're there? Okay, wait. Why
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I didn't realize, I'd be brought on stage with my camera, and after having COVID for a few weeks, I'm not sure anyone wants to look at my face. So,
but yeah, ask your question, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you guys for being here. I'm, super curious. You guys have had the time to digest the technology that blockchain is and what it could potentially add to both games and maybe world solutions. But if you were given a time capsule to let's just say Magic the Gathering was being released today, do you think that you guys would integrate it with blockchain and utilize player-owned assets directly online to have that kind of physical element to the digital world?
So really quickly, so in 2004, maybe 5, we launched Magic with Digital Objects. So we had player-owned assets, almost 20 years ago, long before blockchain. It was very successful. They literally couldn't take enough players in. There were some programming problems with their rules adjudicator or whatever. But so I don't from our perspective, player-owned assets and blockchain are not incompatible. Or lack of blockchain doesn't mean you don't have player-owned assets. So, so I guess that's the first part of the question, and then Richard can answer. We would definitely have. I can tell you, since we did it, we would definitely have player-owned assets, whether there was a blockchain or not.
There, in the comments we have, those are not player-owned assets. Would maybe you can define what we mean by player-owned assets?
Maybe you don't understand what happened back then, but those assets were all backed with real cards. So I guess it's true at any one particular time, someone could take away your cards from you, like from the last instant, although I don't see why there would be any incentive to do that. But yes, they were really owned because you really could cash them in and get real physical things that you could go sell.
The fact that they were backed really makes a difference. When in Hearthstone, whatever you have, they're not backed. They're owned by the company. So a lot of that, some of that is a matter of definition. But if you're actually going to back it and send people cards, I think you've really crossed that line. Well, I mean, it is owned in the same sense that you own stock. It's in it's electron somewhere, and somebody's agreeing to honor that. It's just a matter of whether you trust the person who's honoring it.
Okay.
But would we do it today? Yeah. Yes. But would we use blockchain? I don't know.
Okay. So after someone is asking a question, I'm gonna say thanks, and then so we have room for others. So thanks, Jean Paul. And then I invited also Fishy. I don't know, but meanwhile I'll ask a question, which I think the answer should be short. So why StarkNet? I'll answer this, and I just want to clarify that and we are not. So even though this is like part of a series called Stark at Home, we're not making any announcement that there's whatever a game that is created by Skaff and Richard that is on StarkNet or that it's in the planning. I mean, I personally hope they will create someday a game that will be on StarkNet, but that's not like, don't get some misunderstanding that this is what it's about. And I'll say StarkNet has very high scale and can do like immense amounts of computation and still be on a blockchain. So it's very interesting for whatever, putting more of the gameplay on chain, auto battlers, and just more of the logic of the game. But I mean, that's my quick answer. I don't know if you want to refer to that.
Yeah. Well, actually, let me echo your thing there. So when we first were asked to do blockchain games, I mean, they were bad, right? I mean, there were actual limitations, technological and cost limitations, which presumably StarkNet skips over, that actually made them worse than. But now presumably that is no longer the case. So it's usable now.
So we're waiting to Fishy. I think Fishy wants to join.
Yeah, in chat he says, "Can you try this?"
Yeah, I did send the invite, and I think he or she is joining now. I must say this technology can improve, like the crowdcast thing. Anyways, so are you with us, Fishy, in spirit or in? Let's maybe take a different question, and then while we're waiting. Do you plan to create a Magic Arena game for Web3? Will it be a new game or an update of the existing one?
We're not involved with Wizards of the Coast and Magic anymore. We had a proposal at one time to do their latest version of Magic. This is years ago, more than 10 years ago. Because Magic itself was not designed for online play. So there's a lot of really big problems with it in terms of the timing system and the interruptions, which rely heavily on face-to-face interaction. So we were gonna, but what they did, they turned us down. So they went a different direction. So, but we're really not associated with them anymore.
Okay, so I'll read the Fishy's question because he or she said their mic is not working and laughing out loud. Okay, so do you think a game can be both financially investable and fun? How do you balance those characteristics against each other?
I assume by that it means from the player sort of investment perspective, and if that's correct, I think that the way I view collectability in games as being okay is if it's like stamps, where you don't go to the post office and expect to buy stamps that are marked up 1 billion% because they're collectible. But years later they can have value. So I don't think there's anything inconsistent with that, where there's a long-term investment. You're buying it because it's a wonderful game and maybe it'll go up in value. It's that um, speculative feedback loop, which I don't think there's any resolution there for making a successful game that gets caught in one of those. If it can't shake that, I think the game's doomed.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit to just some of the questions. So now it's like what's in a game, and like the the background for this is that I guess like most of the listeners, I'm guessing, I'm a consumer of games, but like I would never, I can't even start imagining what it means to try and invent a game. And one thing that struck me is that I mean, and I think actually when I reached out, this was like 2 years ago to Richard and Skaff, was because I thought I could find a math connection because Richard was a professor of math, and so I want to ask like math and games. Like, do you need to be a mathematician to design games? Does it help? Is it completely unrelated?
I view math as being important to game design, but I like to characterize it as that it's not math that you have to learn in a university. It's you can learn that math on the street by playing poker. So being a game designer is a lot like being an author. There's really nothing that's wasted if you choose to use it. So if you are into math or economics or biology or literature, all that stuff could come into play in one way or another in game design.
Yeah, it's not. One extra thing is that we found that certain people were much better, like in R&D, especially because our rule system was so complicated and the interactions with all the cards required you to think a little bit about what you were doing. We had hired a bunch of different people over the years, but eventually we started looking very heavily at like we had 2 math professors that were hired after Richard, and aerospace engineer. Lawyers are good too, like people like that who are used to working in these kind of critical thinking, especially around rule interactions. So it is helpful in that kind of very general sense, but at no point did they use any of their math. It was just more of an underlying way of thinking of the world.
So how does one become a game designer? I mean, is there like some exercise that I can I tomorrow morning try to design a game, like, or can our listeners, like, what makes someone a good game designer?
Anybody can design games who loves games and has played games. It's going to take practice to get it right, but for those who are destined to become game designers, it's going to be fun work. For me, it's about exploring all the games that are out there, and even when you don't like them, try to figure out what makes them fun to their audience. Because once you understand that, either it's going to be fun to you as well, in which case you've just have a more enjoyable game life, or it's not, but you still understand what part of it is useful for your game design. So get as broad an understanding of games as possible, and then tinker with games. So I began out with a lot of things like playing chess variations, or we played these pirate games, pirate board games, but then we would make it so that you would play poker in between ports and sort of add on games or modify the rules. And the wonderful thing about tinkering with games is almost always they're worth playing at least once. They may not be worth playing again because they're broken, or people learn how to learn how unbalanced or unfun it is. But that first time you're playing it is fun. So do that. tinker with the games, play different games, and play with those rules. And then that's good practice.
So can you give an example, like what makes chess fun, and like why, of all the variants out there, why is it like the optimum? Like, this particular set of pieces and rules. Like, yeah, what is it?
Well,
Well, you've got to read our book.
Sorry, there's a
You've
book.
got to read our book.
Okay, you should post it in the. Please post it, and we shall.
Yeah, chess in particular, all these games that have been around for ages and ages and ages have evolved, right? They weren't created in their final form. And whether it was a mindful evolution or just people trying random things and what stuck was what they had the most fun with, it varies. But I would answer that, chess might be a local maximum, but it is not, the best chess-like game. One of my favorite game books is Encyclopedia of Chess Games or Chess Variants by David Pritchard, and I've read it from front to back. All 2,000 variations twice, highlighting the ones that are interesting to me. The thing which is the best about chess is not anything to do with its rules, it's its community. And that's often the case with games, is you get this feedback between the community, right? It's amazing that you can go to a store, buy a chess book, and read these people's thoughts on chess and chess games over the last couple hundred years. And that isn't part of the rules of chess, but it is part of the quality of chess as a gestalt experience, and is really, you cannot separate community from game, and so
That's also in the book.
yeah.
So it's clear that the best chess variant is chess, regardless of whatever any rules characteristic is. That's what Richard's trying to say, because the goal of a game is to play it. You're not, if you're trapped on an island by yourself, then I don't know, you can pick which one you like. But for practical purposes, it's, the community is so important. And in fact, like what Richard was saying about testing other games, is if a game is successful and you're a game designer, you need to understand that there's something good about that game at a minimum. And figuring that out, especially if you hate the game, especially if you hate it, you need to understand why it's successful. Now, maybe it's marketing that makes it successful, or a license, but sometimes it's an actual quality of the game itself. I personally got very annoyed when everyone at Wizards of the Coast said Monopoly was a bad game. And not that I thought it was a good game, but Monopoly gets dismissed, so much by every game designer. And they're like, oh, well, it was just first to market. But it really wasn't first to market. There were plenty of other games around then. And so there are certain things. Thank you for posting that. Because we were too lazy to. And so there's certain specific things about that game which are actually pretty brilliant. And very useful pieces of advice for game designers. Really quickly with Monopoly, like it's one of the many things it's really good at is most board games, you take your turn and there's, I don't know, 10 players. So you're playing 1/10 of the time. And especially when families were larger, but whatever, you're getting together with 4 or 6 friends. Well, the most exciting part about Monopoly is when it's not your turn. So it completely flips your attention in a way that's pretty innovative. Anyway, let me answer since Richard's not saying it. I will tell you, having watched him over the years, I will tell you what makes a good game designer, and it's hard work. And it's probably what makes a good anything. But it is unbelievable how many people attempt to design games and don't want to put in the work. They want to do the creative part, but they don't want to sit down and play it again and play it again and play it with people that they don't like and play it with dumb people and play it with smart people and play it with annoying people, and then that helps you understand what's actually going on with your game. And just putting in the time and play testing your games will tell people. We used to take submissions back at Wizards, and people would submit this game, and you would get 5 minutes into it, and you're like, well, clearly no one has ever play tested this game. You could just immediately see that. So
now I wonder, when you add to that, I wonder, is optimism very important? I'm just, extrapolating from my experience in math and research. Hard work is important. I found that to creativity, optimism is really, really important. Is it that way there as well?
I would almost worry, when I work on things, my inclination is to keep working on them until they're good, and Richard does not. So I mean, optimism can work against you a little bit if you keep pushing down a particular path. You need to know when to give up. That's not my best quality. Richard's really good at that wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly, one of the things which one of the way I lead my life is by finding things to enjoy in what I'm doing, and that's especially true in games. I don't know whether that uh, I'm sure that impacts my design. I'm not sure whether it's in general for better or for worse. I know it makes for slow design because I go down a lot of paths which I don't end up using because I'm enjoying my trip. But
So last question for me, and then we'll take more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. So what's I'm sure you ask this all the time, but what is your favorite game, and why? Or if there's mention one really, really good game, and why?
yeah, it's hard to mention one. If I'm forced to mention one, I usually have to go with poker. Um, a long time ago, I used to go with Go, but then I became a poker man. Um, Poker's is such a good game. It's so simple. It scales to so many different levels of play. Before a small handful of uh, poker games got locked in as the way to play poker, it was massively variable. When you played whatever dealer's choice, there's just hundreds of different games, each with their own nuances. So it's a great learning ground for players, for prospective game designers as well. It's hard to beat poker. Um, just to name a proprietary game as well. My favorite cooperative game is Hanabi. I just love the simplicity and different levels of innovation you can have while playing as a partner with other people. The challenges of communication remind me of other games I love, like Bridge, where you're taking this complicated system and just trying to figure out how to make the best of it, and dealing with novel situations all the time.
Yeah, I love Hanabi. I really I will say my favorite game is basketball by far. And the thing I like about basketball is it's both, there's the both sort of personal element, but there's a strategic element to it. But specifically, it's the you very, very rarely get this in modern games, like almost never. There's very few team games, period. And then when there are team games, it's very rare that you have specialized roles. And so, you sort of American football is the ultimate expression of that. In terms of big games, it's kind of difficult to play. For anybody. And certainly once you're older, and so the specialized role part in a team situation that I really like about basketball. I wish there were more games that duplicated that
There's soccer, but it's less specialized. Where there's the goalie. And
Yes, right. Soccer's less specialized, but also sorry. I don't mean in the real world. There are multiple, lots of sports do that, but in the online or even board game world, in the board game, it's really difficult to do team games that are large enough that people have specialized roles. There are some, like Dungeons and Dragons is a good example. But then online, a competitive game with specialized roles on a team is rare. I mean, there are definitely examples. I just wish there were a ton more.
Yeah, it should be worth pointing out that, I mean, a lot of games, cooperative games, do have specialized roles, but they often are associated with sort of a deterministic thing where, like in Pandemic, it's an excellent game. Everybody's got specialized roles, but people can play my position for me, essentially, if they want, which you can't do in basketball.
And I think that's to me, and I've been saying this for a zillion years, and to me that's the key to success of like League of Legends is like the example of that. You're still not quite as specialized in certain, depends on what you mean by specialized, but basically that takes that to heart, and I think there's no small part of its success is because it's capturing that part of the market, which no one else wanted to go into.
That's one of the reasons I loved Team Fortress. You definitely had specialized rules there.
Okay, so we'll now go to a few more questions by the audience, and I'm going to try to invite. So I'm trying to invite Ricardo Nakamoto, Maganza, and meanwhile I'll read one of them. What is your opinion, if any, on Web3 games by Sal?
Well, my opinions are all tied up in this thing that I've been hitting on, which is that if a game leads with economic opportunity for players, it's just not the right way to start. It's got to lead with it's got to be accessible to anybody who wants to play it, because community is the most important thing. And if you don't have that community, and if you don't build that community, or you try to immediately start to segregate it based on who bought in when and who's paid what, that's just it's a strike against it. But that's not intrinsic to Web3. That's just the way things have been done that I've seen to date.
Okay, Ricardo, your question.
Hi everyone. Nice to meet you. So thank you everyone for the nice session. So my question was, like, I mentioned Keyforge, which was one of my favorite games and concepts in card games, like leveraging this like technology and data. And I wanted to ask you about like what went wrong with Keyforge in the years, because it seemed that it was a huge thing at the beginning, and then it sort of stalled, failed to attract a community. I don't know. So I wanted to know your opinion on whether it was like a business marketing. Of course, I don't know. I know you're not like Fantasy Flight Games, so but
Right.
Yeah, I mean your opinion. But and then, well, there was also COVID with that. So I want to know what went wrong.
Right. So at the organized play level, I think diplomatically, the organized play system that they had was not ideal for the game, and we would have done a much different system than was done. And I think that it's really, really, really critical to match the organized play system to the game specifically. So that's probably the number one. Well, that's the number two problem. The number one problem really was probably COVID. It came out at a really bad time when the organized play system was launched, and things were going really well for a while, and then even FFG saw the problems, and then they tried to pivot to a different system, and then COVID hit, and so COVID was really hard on like kind of new games trying to develop an audience. Without COVID, they probably would have been able. I think they would have been able to correct it and continue to grow. But COVID hit it the exact worst time. They had to. The only way they could have gotten past it was if their launch in the beginning had been like perfect, which it never is for any game. And so then they got killed, early on.
Yeah. COVID hit at a really bad time for it, but as Skaff said, the root thing is probably the organized play. The other thing, the game was designed to be played digitally, and they had planned on doing a digital version within 6 months of its release, which they never did. that could have helped a lot, but it just wasn't there. As said in the comments by Zach, do have a lot of high hopes for Ghost Galaxy. The
Right.
Christian Peterson was the person who originally okayed the game with Fantasy Flight, and so he really, he's been with the game as long as anybody, and so him at the helm, I think, is going to be a good thing.
Yeah, it's got a good chance. So another thing is we are working on, games that are kind of digital versions of other new games that are digital, similar games to Keyforge, unique deck stuff.
Okay, so thanks, Ricardo.
I should mention also SoulForge Fusion uses a similar
that's right.
concept, and we're working on that. So SoulForge Fusion has unique half decks. So you get 2 half decks, you shuffle them together, and that's your deck. So it's got this little touch of customization, and it's should make for an interesting game.
Okay, so last question, and then we'll just wrap up. And I can't invite EAM, I don't know why, on screen, so I'll just read the question. Is there, and I'm sorry we don't have time to answer all of the questions, is there a future where the community has more power over the intellectual property and the shape of the game they partake in, instead of it being in the hands of a couple of devs who lack a broad oversight? Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's really hard. There's a balance there. If the devs have too much control, it's bad, and if they have too little control, it's bad. If it's this true open democracy, you probably won't be able to coalesce around enough of a community. Exactly this chess variant problem, like who picks the chess variants. So I guess I don't know if you want to go further. There's room for it, but you need constraints. I don't know.
Okay. So with this, I want to thank again Skaff Elias and Richard Garfield, OGs of Magic the Gathering, and amazing game designers, for sharing some thoughts on games in general and what could happen over Web3. And I hope to see you all next year on some other episode of Stark at Home, where we'll try to explore deep concepts on an informal level, especially if it relates to things like proof systems, mathematics, blockchains, and cryptography. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Thanks.
Thanks for moderating. That made it easy.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.